a clash 5 years ago, and we've just begun a process of normalization from October of 2024. So what does this early harvest mean? Also, China's envoy, Xu Feihong, who is the ambassador here, just last week, before leaving for the SCO Summit, said that India has to stand up to the bully that America is. America is a bully, and give the bully an inch, he will ask for a mile. China also sees improved ties as a counter to the Indo-Pacific, to the Quad. Now, the New York Times is reporting that Donald Trump may not come to India for the Quad. So that's again a matter of concern. The Prime Minister has said that it's important for India and China, and this is an interview that he gave to a Japanese daily before his visit to Japan yesterday, where he said that it's important for India and China to work together to bring stability to the global economic order. So these are some of the pointers, and of course there will be the meeting with President Putin as well. That's going to be on Monday, I believe, after the opening plenary of the summit. But first, I want to go across to our guests. Ambassador Dogra is there with us. Ambassador Dogra, you know, it's all fine. I mean, India and China should have a normal relationship, as normal as possible between two neighbors. Given both the international context, which is the Trump tariffs and how to deal with it, and the real bad blood that's going on between Delhi and Washington right now, how much of a thaw can there be between India and China, given what we've gone through in these last 5 years?
Well, America, as you said very rightly, is the overhang in this meeting. But that's not the central point. China is not going to tell us how to deal with America or Trump, basically. And India is not going to give any advice to China because it doesn't need one. It has already sorted out its issues with America by standing up to it and not giving in to its bullying. India has done it in its own way. The problem, let me also point out, is not America. America bullies countries, but Trump is a bull. So while bullies can be tackled, bulls are unpredictable. So this is a temporary issue that India and the world has with the person who happens to be the president of America at the moment. The more important point is India and China, and what are they going to discuss? Of course, Ukraine, Gaza, and so on, or the killing of the Houthi Prime Minister yesterday. They will also be part of the discussion, but they are not going to be the central theme of Xi-Modi meeting. And Xi-Modi meeting is limited. 40 minutes may be the time, but with interpretation, it amounts to only 20 minutes. And I don't think they will go into the details of what needs to be done with regard to the border, except get on to what is possible, as you said, low-hanging fruit on the border issue, which is basically the central sector. So if something can be done as early as possible on defining that central sector, I think that will be a great confidence building measure.
So let's get the view from Beijing. Aina Tangent is also joining us. The view from Delhi, Mr. Tangent, has always been, even on the border issue, is that is central to resolving the trust deficit. That is central to normalizing ties between Beijing and Delhi. Beijing's view always in these last few years has been that you've got a whole gamut of other issues that we can talk about. Let's park the border aside. But that's not the view that's shared here in India. Have we met each other halfway on that at least? Because India feels that is the big elephant in the room. You have to tackle the boundary issue first. Everything else can be tackled later.
In relations between countries, there are different perspectives on what is most important. Obviously, territorial issues for India has become a central nationalistic point. For China, they don't see it that way. They see a bunch of pastures there. They see competition. So you can look at the past narratives all you want. They will not solve the future. So the question is, does India want to follow what Rahul has been saying? In essence, that the U.S. is the real ally and China is just an impediment, something that has to be dealt with, and that they can be played off against each other. Or, as I was sensing, the ambassador says that there has to be some real understanding between both sides. And it's not just about India and China here. I mean, it's tempting to say, oh, the border issue is the only issue in the world. But, you know, we have Gaza, we have Ukraine, we have all things happening throughout Southeast Asia, Africa. These are things which need leadership. And I think this is really, and I keep saying it, and I'm going to keep saying it, an opportunity for India, for Narendra Modi to stand up, not only for India, but for the entire world. Tell this bully, Trump, that it's enough. If he wants to tax his people with tariffs, fine, but the tariffs should be uniform. He should not try to pit one country against another. And this is the most important thing. In terms of what's happening, I do believe it's optics. Trust is built step by step. It's not going to be settled. They're not going to announce we have a new border. That's unrealistic. It wasn't clear that that Modi was coming until Wang Yi made the invitation. There's not enough time in there to do that. So let us settle for optics, for good intentions, for a belief that these things can be done. Now, I just want to add one last thing. This idea about the trade deficit. No one is forcing anyone in India to buy Chinese goods. If they could buy them somewhere else at a fair price, I think they would. There's not a lot of tremendous love for China. So at this point, stop blaming China for doing it. These are mostly private companies who are selling electronic goods, vacuum cleaners, washers, things like this. Let us figure out how China can help India, all right, with intellectual property and also balancing these trades through investment. That is a solution. You want to look at the past, you'll never get to the future.
No, I mean, if you had said the same thing 2 or 3 years ago, it would have made sense. In the current context where Donald Trump is using the whole idea of deficits and weaponizing trade and weaponizing tariffs, any country which has a deficit, leave alone a deficit close to $100 billion between India and China, I don't think that would be acceptable to any country. But anyway, that's not the front and center issue that both the leaders will be discussing today. They will be discussing, the global situation, certainly Ukraine, maybe not Gaza, but certainly Ukraine, because willy-nilly, like I keep saying, India is now a stakeholder in peace in Ukraine, and Trump has made India a party to this entire thing. It's India's onus, as Navarro says, and wrongfully you can say it's Modi's war. It may not be Modi's war, but it certainly has to be Modi's peace, because I don't think those oil tariffs are going away until there is peace in Ukraine. So whether we like it or not, this is the diplomatic sort of global power play that is happening. Trump has forced India to become a stakeholder in peace in Ukraine and to try and use whatever leverage India has. And admittedly, there are very few points of leverage that anyone can have with President Putin. Maybe the Chinese have a point of leverage. India certainly has to some degree, but ultimately he's going to take a call on whether to continue with the war or move to the negotiating table, move towards peace, depending on his own assessment of whether he has won the war, whether his war objectives have been achieved. But willy-nilly, like I said, India is now a party to the peace in Ukraine, and that's why the Ukrainian president had a phone call just on the eve of this SCO summit, hoping that Prime Minister Modi, when he meets President Putin, and I think that meeting is going to happen tomorrow, can sort of convince him to move further towards a negotiated peace. But, Major Jolly is here with us. I want to go back to the India-China situation, because I think it's fundamental, it is central, that if there has to be a degree of normalcy between Delhi and Beijing, then the boundary issue needs to be addressed and it needs to be resolved. And fortunately, 6, 7, 8 months ago, when the two leaders met in Kazan, the first step of that process, disengagement, was agreed to. I think there were 7 friction points. There were 2 that were outstanding, Depsang and Demchok. That was agreed to. So disengagement started and completed after the meeting in Kazan. Can we get to the next step, Major, which is de-escalation, and then finally the last step, which is de-induction? The last thing that India or China want is 50,000 troops on either side of the LAC. Major.
Yeah, thanks, Jaga. So I'll just take a note from what Mr. Tangent was saying, that what he was trying to say is that we keep the border issue aside and focus on the trade, commerce and economics of it. That cannot happen actually. The bane of our relationship always has been the LAC issue, right from the independence till today. You do a lot of trade and suddenly there's an escalation and there's a border dispute and everything goes away. Then you're banning stuff, you're cancelling visas. So that till the time that is resolved, there is no actually conclusive step ahead, because the risk of that escalatory initiative which stays with China most of the time is always there. So I would say that one of the greatest, for a moment, let's forget the multilateral part and focus on the bilateral Indo-China. Some of the greatest achievement that this conference, this meeting or the discussion between two leaders can achieve is, one, at least attaining a certain
saying this for the last 2 days, that this is really an optically charged meeting. Not much is going to come out of it. Both sides have been playing down the talk of big breakthroughs. Wang Li, when he came, if you remember, to New Delhi, he listed 10 priority areas, the commandments, so to speak, of this particular recent decision to thaw out some of that ice that had built up. And if you really look at those very minutely, you will see that there are a lot of promises there. There are no concrete realizations. So as I said, they were looking to a harvest. When the harvest was going to be, what the time of that harvest was going to be, no one knows. And that's the reason why you have this sort of limited time. And Rajiv Dogra has been in the room and during meetings such as this, and you know that's precious little time actually to really get any substantive conversation started. And I think our guest in Beijing was making the same point, that it's high on optics, low on substance, but still it's a message that is being sent out. And New Delhi obviously benefits from an association like this, because what it does say to the United States is that, look, we have our own interests, we're going to prioritize them. You cannot dictate from Washington who we meet, when we meet, in what capacity we meet, how we engage. So our strategic autonomy is important to us. I think both countries in that sense are going to be sending this message out just through this enlarged photo op, really elaborate photo op, with a few conversations about perhaps resolving to push forward the already incipient agenda. Now, very critically, at about 9:30 Tianjin time, we're going to have a press conference where we're going to be told exactly what the two sides really discuss. So that's going to be in the next 8 to 10 hours. But fundamentally, this meeting, 20 minutes, it's probably a reintroduction of all the ground that we've covered so far. Perhaps a look back at the ground and perhaps give a broad direction to where we need to go from here on. Of course, it'd be also important to see the two statements that will be put out by both sides on how they saw the conversation. Precious 20 minutes, that is. But remember, all of this, of course, being preceded by a statement that has also been made by the Russian president on the importance of BRICS. So a lot of talk, but substance, big question mark.
You know, it's in about 3 to 4 minutes. It's going to be noon in Tianjin and in Beijing. It's going to be 9:30 a.m. here in India. It's going to be midnight in Washington. And that's when this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping will begin. As Rahul has been reporting, it's been curtailed to 20 minutes. You can get precious little discussed and deliberated upon in those 20 minutes. But those pictures will be viewed across the globe. And I'm willing to wager that President Trump, wherever he is in Washington or in Mar-a-Lago, will be watching those pictures very closely. I wouldn't be surprised if he puts out a post on Truth Social soon after saying, oh, this is the countries of BRICS coming together, trying to de-dollarize, etc. I think the images will be powerful in and of themselves, no doubt about it. I believe a gentleman named Rick Sanchez, who's a US political commentator, has just spoken to us, and he has said that this is going to send out a message to Washington. President Trump will be keenly following this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, and he will not like it. He has been railing and ranting against BRICS, about BRICS currency, about localization of trade in these countries and so on, de-dollarization. These are all big pain points for him. So he will certainly say something, if not tonight, maybe tomorrow, which is Sunday in the United States. But let's be very clear about this. The coming together of India, China, Russia will have huge ramifications across the globe. Certainly, the Trump administration will not like it. There will begin to be views within the Trump administration that we can't be seen as pushing India away from the US corner. It is the United States that came up with the concept of Quad. In fact, it was Shinzo Abe. But then subsequently, over the last 10 years or so, the Quad had become sort of a fundamental, foundational block here in the Indo-Pacific. Countries like Japan, Australia, the US, India coming together to try and convey the signal to Beijing that you can't be the regional hegemon, that you have to play by the rules of the game. Now, the United States is no longer prioritizing the Quad. The New York Times reporting that President Trump might not even travel to India for the Quad if it is happening later this year in New Delhi. So all of these sort of changes, the traditional alliances, partnerships, all of what we know can turn on a dime. Certainly, American foreign policy has turned on a dime, as we've seen over the last 6 months. And now, these images from Tianjin, which will be broadcast across the world, will be very, very carefully passed, certainly in Washington, It will be in Beijing and Delhi, of course, and also in Moscow. And like I said, the big overhang is the Trump tariffs and how various countries are coming together to deal with it in their own way. Should Trump be worried about this rising India, China, possibly Russia sort of grouping into this mix? Together, India, China, Russia command $50 trillion, $50 trillion in global GDP. They also trade together, in fact, just exports alone, more than $5 trillion of exports between India, Russia and China. That is almost a fifth of all global merchandise flowing through these three countries. 4.7 trillion US dollars is what the foreign reserves are of these three countries. It makes up almost 40% of the world's safety net. And the population, of course, in excess of 3 billion citizens, again representing almost 40% of the global population, the total population around the world. It's the largest, hungriest, and possibly one of the richest markets, consumer markets in human history. And that is something that Trump will be deeply, deeply aware of and wary of, because the last thing you ask any US foreign policy expert, the last thing they want is a coming together of Russia, India and China. And in this case, whatever guardrails there might be, whatever apprehension, doubts India might have on China's intentions, given what we've seen over the last 5 years at the border, fact is that there will be a certain degree to which India can cooperate with China, but it is Trump and the current US administration that is pushing India further away from the US axis, from the Quad axis, and further into the corner of China and Russia. And like I said, India now has a real stake in finding peace in Ukraine as well. So that conversation with President Putin becomes important as well. Rajiv Dogra continues to be with us. Major Manik Jolly is here in our studios. I hope Aina Tangent is there as well. I believe the meeting, which was due to begin at 9:30 India time, noon Tianjin, has just started or is starting shortly. Let's see if we can go across to Rahul Shivshankar as well. Rahul, any word you're getting from the Indian delegation on whether the meeting has begun? And like you said, it's now been curtailed to 20 minutes. So in the next half hour, it'll all be done and dusted. What are you hearing from your sources in the delegation that's traveling, the Indian delegation that's traveling to Tianjin?
Well, it's supposed to start at 12 o'clock. So we're obviously expecting word now. Any moment, perhaps, from our sources here at the MEA who are going to sort of update us. We're focused on that. I think that decision on kicking off those talks has of course been taken after due consideration for the ramifications. Don't forget that one is expecting. Don't forget that this conversation has also a larger implication on the way China is wanting to position itself. So this is not just from the Indian lens that one needs to see it, it's also from the Chinese lens. Remember, India is an important democracy and was in close alliance with the United States, at least seen as such. And the Chinese also believe, there is a view here in China, that the Indians have only decided to add impetus to this relationship because of a souring that has taken place over a trade conflagration between New Delhi and Washington. So they're very welcoming of the impetus that has been added to this sort of decision by New Delhi to look east now. And they're going to also communicate to their own people here in China, the media here specifically. And I was picking that up, that this is not just something that was born out of the necessity of what Trump has been doing, but also, of course, an important sort of reassertion of Chinese authority in the region, that China remains the principal hegemon in this particular region and remains really the bulwark around which geopolitics and the balance of powers, etc., all take place here in Asia. So fundamentally, this is a great moment for China, because they're being able to project that, look, there is another pole in this world, and that also allows for a bit of coalescing around it. And it's not just the Americans that can command authority as far as projecting
just very
their
quickly
own
before we get the first
So
pictures
this
of this
is very
meeting, I believe we'll
important.
get this in the next few minutes. Just sort of paint the lay of the land for us. Where are you? How many folks from the world media have descended there? Where is this meeting happening? Because generally the media center and the Summit Hotel are sort of different. So just pan the camera and show us the lay of the land, please.
Yeah, so here we are. We're in this media center, which is quite expensive. And not only is there Indian media here, but there is media from all the SCO countries. And if you just look around you, you will see a large number of delegates who are sitting here also from the various communications departments of the various countries. Now remember, India has a free media. A large number of these media enterprises that we see around us are actually state-owned. So there's only a limited amount of conversations that take place beyond the script, so to speak, Zaka. And this particular media center, and you can see it's vast, absolutely, is abutting where the plenary session is going to kick off tomorrow. We're also told, of course, that later in the evening there's going to be a big dinner meeting between all the SCO head of states, and that's also going to take place just across from us. If you were to walk straight down this and knock down that wall, you'd go straight into where where the SCO leaders will be meeting to have that important informal meeting where there could be pull asides. Let's not forget that there'll be a lot of attention focused on the Prime Minister of Pakistan and of course Prime Minister Modi. He's going to be in the room where the Prime Minister of Pakistan is going to be in the room. It's going to be the first time they're going to cross paths, so to speak, after Operation Sindoor. So the optics of that will also make for commentary. I don't want to overemphasize that because the Indian side doesn't see itself in the same ballpark, even in the same room really, as Pakistan considers Pakistan, as you all know, sort of a depleted economy and a diminished force as it appears here. There was also, of course, a huge confusion over whether Shehbaz Sharif was going to attend or whether it was just going to be the External Affairs Minister of Pakistan or perhaps just somebody else entirely different, picked by the military establishment. As you know, right now it's
we've just got an update from MEA sources, update from Tianjin, that the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping has just begun. It has just begun. We can do breaking graphics on the side of this. The bilateral meeting between President Xi Jinping of China and Prime Minister Modi has just begun. This is the update that's coming from Tianjin by way of MEA sources. We haven't got the first pictures yet, but we can now officially confirm to you by way of MEA sources that the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping of China has just begun. It was expected to go on for 40 minutes. Let's see how long it goes on. You also have to account for interpreters because it takes just the same amount of time for the interpretation to begin as well. So on the right side, we have the breaking graphics. The meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping of China, the bilateral meeting, has just begun. Rahul, take it away. What more details? All right, you have seen the pictures, Rahul, so go ahead. Yes.
Center. Yes, and the pictures. Yeah, there's a big screen here at the media center which is flashing those pictures. President Xi Jinping is sitting at the head of a long table, and you have the Prime Minister of India. We're going to try and bring that, it's in the distance really. Those are the first pictures of that meeting. You can see perhaps that screen. It's been sort of obstructed by a gentleman who's standing there, but no doubt you're going to get that feed very shortly. In just a few moments, perhaps it's going to be released very soon to ANI and the other media. So you're going to get that very, very shortly, but we're beginning to see the glimpses of that meeting. At this moment, we're seeing the leaders seated, so perhaps I missed the initial handshake or maybe even the hug, so I don't quite know if that really did take place, but characteristically, we've seen warm embraces between the two leaders, and I think President Xi would have actually accorded quite a warm welcome to the Prime Minister. Remember, in the Chinese media, this particular meeting has been talked up. Remember, India is a democracy at the end of the day, and the SCO Summit includes a large number of countries that are not functional democracies. They might have democratic pretensions, but they're not. So to enhance the credibility of the SCO, the Prime Minister's presence is extremely, extremely important. So we're going to try and get you those pictures. If we can, in advance. There's also a screen behind me. I'm not seeing them there, but fundamentally I think we're just going to have a broadcast. In fact, I was just speaking to the ANI journalist who's signaling to me that in the next 5 or 6 minutes they're going to have some visuals emerging from that meeting. 20 minutes, Zaka, and 20 minutes is not a very long time. We're actually on a steady tripod, so it becomes a little difficult to move this very quickly and go across to that screen. The screen itself is about 120 meters from where I am, so it's quite far out. So I wish I could have actually been able to project those pictures to you. And even if we were trying to do so from here, there are too many people in the middle of that, so that's going to sort of obstruct our view. But nonetheless, the point is that those pictures are going to be coming in. There's not a loop right now, so that screen has gone off right now. So we're obviously expecting more pictures to come through, and the moment they do, we're going to try and pan the camera in that direction.
Meeting has now officially begun between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. The moment those pictures come, we will be broadcasting it to you. This is the first meeting on Chinese soil since 2018. The last time the Prime Minister traveled to China was for the BRICS Summit in 2018. They also met in Kazan last year on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit there, which is where they agreed to the first step, which was the disengagement after the bloody clashes that happened 5 years ago in Galwan. Siddhant is also joining us. Siddhant, what are you picking up by way of your MEA sources? How soon will we get the first pictures of this meeting? And any word you're picking up on, whether it's 40 minutes long, 20 minutes long, and what can you possibly discuss in half an hour or so, given the gamut of issues between Beijing and Delhi?
Well, that's right, Zaka. So what I have been told is that this meeting is going to last for about 40 minutes, Zaka. And as you rightly said, this is the first time both leaders are meeting on the Chinese soil. And there are a lot to discuss, and in fact, last time when both leaders met in Kazan, perhaps that was kind of a restart of India-China ties, after which there have been a couple of high-level visits from both the sides, and now again both leaders are meeting. So as you rightly said, the focus is going to be on the boundary issue. In fact, there have been a lot of agreements, on which both sides have agreed during the last special representative level talks. Zaka, also, as you rightly said, that there were 3 Ds which were decided in Kazan. The first is disengagement, the second is de-escalation and de-induction. So disengagement has happened. The second step, de-escalation and de-induction, the focus is going to be on that. Then the 2 MOUs, Zaka, the hydrological data sharing MOU between China and India, both the MOUs have expired. This is perhaps something with which Indian government informed the parliament during the last session. So perhaps discussion could take place on that as well, because India will definitely be looking forward to be signing those agreements, those MOUs again with China.
Let's go back to Rahul. So the border is obviously the front and center issue, no doubt about it. We'll all be keenly watching, Rahul, whether the next 2 steps, which is de-escalation and de-induction, happen, because I've been saying this all morning that you can't have 50,000 troops on either side staring down each other. But there are other agreements that can be reached as well. Just in the last 6 months, they've agreed to resume direct flights, tourist visas. The Mansarovar Yatra has been resumed. What next can be done to move in that road of normalization between Delhi and Beijing? Rahul.
Well, I suppose when these 2 leaders meet, they're going to try and actualize some of those commitments. So we don't still have a time frame on when the direct flights are going to be resumed. There is a lot of talk that it might actually be kick-started by the end of the year, but that date could be brought forward. Look, if it's going to be about optics, they have to suggest that this meeting was meaningful in some way. There has also been, of course, talk about sharing rare earth materials, rare earth metals with India. There's also been talk about reinstating trade ties to the place they were earlier. Remember, India had sort of imposed restrictions on Chinese investments. That's going to be sort of lifted, not in the form of caps, but at least the screening that we had sort of decided to conduct. There's also talk that some of the apps that might have been banned and other applications in the IT side of things might be re-looked at. But that will all depend on how much China is willing to commit to Indian needs also. Remember, critical earth, rare earth materials, the Chinese have withheld. They've also withheld important personal and technical assistance. They've also withheld tunnel boring machines, which have set us back in some of our key projects. So if the Chinese commit to doing that very quickly and they set a timeline, then the Indians will obviously take a proactive view and try to meet the Chinese expectations on that front. But yes, it is in those areas, specifically renewing people-to-people contacts, that we're expecting timelines to be set, and that's really the expectation. But beyond that, whether it comes to the de-induction of troops, etc., I think those are not low-hanging fruits. Those are slightly long-term and will depend really on trust levels and whether they are replenished to the level that both sides feel confident that they can vacate those border areas without compromising their
Major
strategic
Jolly is also
territorial
here with
interests.
us. When Wang Yi was here just last week, one of the things that they agreed to was an early harvest to the boundary question. And we've been talking about this for a number of years. The Chinese position has been, look, there are problems in the eastern sector, there are problems in the western sector. Why don't you deal with the low-hanging fruit, those areas where both sides have agreed, where the LAC passes through, and thereby at least announce in part some of those areas have been sort of resolved between India and China. You think that's possible, Major?
Yeah, sure. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were asking. Yeah, of course. I mean, although there have been so many, flashpoints, if I'd like to, and the quick word that everyone likes to use is salami slicing, where the escalation tends to increase. They do the change that they need to make. Although we're talking totally on a bigger issue today, but to, as you said, catching on to the lower hanging fruits where things are finalized, the LACs agreed upon, I think those should surely be locked down, and that can be done into these things. And these are the forums at which, these things can be finalized. Fine, you can't get the bigger resolutions because time is less and there are a lot of horde of issues going on. But if you go prepared, but let's get a lockdown on this, this definitely can be done, and it will be a great step.
What will it take to send the troops back to the barracks as they were pre summer of 2020?
Definitely a bilateral resolve. None of the countries, and I would like to actually say one more thing here, in spite of the fact that Galwan is such a hot issue and there was so much deployment,
into this and formalize perhaps. The mechanisms might also be sort of tied down to a whole set of escalatory meetings which could go right up the chain and back to the desk of the NSA. So these conversations could lead to some structure being added really to this process that is now underway, and it takes off from the meeting in Kazan a year ago. So we must also begin to look at this slightly independently from the tariff overhang. Of course, that is the elephant in the room, as you've been suggesting. But if these ties are going to have to acquire a kinetic energy of their own, then clearly those trust issues have to be narrowed to the point where they don't become obstacles in normalizing the relationship. I think if we start looking at that as an outcome, then perhaps there could be a lot more to talk about this evening than preliminary sort of introductions and so on and so forth, and the conversation need not be centered around the optics. So I think that's really fundamentally what the two sides are looking at. We have to look at the readout. As you said, after the Wang Yi meeting, there was this sort of assumption that India had agreed to a one China policy, and then there was that whole rollback from the Indian side. So I think this time that game will be tighter. We'll have to look at the way both sides are really approaching this particular conversation.
I also want to go across to Siddhant. So on the economic trade side, Siddhant, after Galwan, India banned a whole host of Chinese apps. I think the most popular would be TikTok. This is even as the US and China are also sort of in this engaged situation on what to do about TikTok, bring back the ban on TikTok, not bring back the ban on TikTok. And I'm hearing a lot that, this could be one of the things agreed to when Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping meet. They're meeting right now, that some of these Chinese apps, India could sort of reverse its position on and bring some of those popular ones back. Also on trade and investment, more Chinese trade and more Chinese investment, more importantly, into Indian projects. What are you hearing on that front?
Well, absolutely, Zaka. As far as a reversal of policy on the Chinese app is concerned, perhaps that could be one of the biggest takeaways from this particular meeting. Then also, Zaka, in fact, a few weeks back, we reported that Air India have been told to prepare flights, direct flights to China. At that point in time, Ministry of External Affairs told us that there is no as such plan for now, but we could expect, direct flight to be starting after today's meeting, Zaka. Other than this, Zaka, what India is looking for is assurance. There should not be export control. As far as rare earth, as far as tunnel boring machine, fertilizers is concerned. So perhaps that is something which India is looking for at this point in time. In fact, Wang Yi assured EM S. Jaishankar during their delegation level talks here in New Delhi that China will continue the uninterrupted supply of rare earth, fertilizers and tunnel boring machine. But again, Zaka, it was the assurance was given in the meeting, but then Chinese Foreign Ministry in Beijing said that they are not aware of this development. So since two leaders are meeting, perhaps definitely India will try to get assurance as far as supplies to India is concerned. Then as I said, Zaka, before, the hydrological data sharing MOU, perhaps that will also be the focus area for India.
perspective, a huge dam like that in an ecologically sensitive area is earthquake prone, besides affecting the entire marine and agricultural life of the downstream country, which means basically assert. Now, obviously, at the Prime Minister and President Xi's level, it will be referred to in passing. It will not be discussed in great detail. To my mind, India's priorities should be number one. If another conflict happens between India and Pakistan, will China play the same role? And in fact, our army chief has been warning that, let's not think that the next conflict is far off. It could happen earlier than we imagine. So that is really a top priority for India, getting some kind of an assurance, even if China does not live up to it, that look, this is not on. Border is
Go across to Rahul. Rahul, I believe you now have some more details about the delegation who's part of this meeting, who are in the room right now as the two principals meet. So tell us, who else is there, and
I've just got a message actually on that query, because as you know, it was quite closely guarded. So there's the Prime Minister, the National Security Advisor, and the Foreign Secretary, Mr. They're all three in there. And we're told that the Chinese side will have the President, the NSA, and the FS from their side. I'm also getting, as I'm speaking right now, a message which I'm going to just look at. It's sort of someone's tweeting from the other side. Yes, from the other side, we have Xi, Wang Yi, chairman of the NDRC, and the Commerce Minister. So you have four people from the Chinese side, which are their principals, and here we have the Prime Minister, NSA, and FS. So that gives you a bit of an idea, really, of what's on the table. Trade definitively on the table. I suppose now we can confidently assume that there will be some timelines that might be announced for normalizing trade talks, because the Commerce Minister is there, the chairman of the NDRC is there, Wang Yi is there, and President Xi are in the room. Prime Minister from our side is the Prime Minister, the NSA, and the FS. So all three principals from our side who have been interlocuting with the Chinese are there. So obviously the boundary issue is something also that to be discussed. I don't know in how much depth, and perhaps we've been talking to and saying that there could be some confidence building measures that could be announced with regards to normalizing the situation on that boundary. And Zaka, maybe there'll also be potentially maybe even a timeline for the induction. So let's hold our horses. This seems to be a promising set of individuals in there, which can give us an indication really of where this conversation is headed. So fundamentally, I think it's safe to assume that this is not just an optics conversation. There are going to be issues on the table which perhaps will be discussed or touched upon, and maybe some consequential decisions could be taken.
So I just want to also add, the External Affairs Minister is reportedly not traveling as part of the delegation. He's not well, is what we're given to understand. We're also awaiting pictures of this meeting. It's there on the YouTube channel of the Prime Minister's office. It's there on our YouTube channel as well. Any moment now, we are expected to get these pictures of the meeting between the two principals, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping of China. The first time that the Prime Minister has touched down on Chinese soil, is having meetings on Chinese soil, certainly after the Galwan clashes, and it's the first time in 7 years. They did meet, though, last year, October of 2024, in Kazan, and that's where the thaw and the process of normalization really began, with the first step in that boundary dispute in this ongoing boundary situation, which was the disengagement process, had been completed. The last two remaining points, which were Depsang and Demchok, they got resolved, and now you still have two more steps, which is de-escalation and de-induction. Eventually, you have to get the troops back to their barracks, as was the case pre-2020, pre those clashes. General Pandey is also here in our studios. Do you think that they can agree to the second and third steps today, or at least give some sort of a timeline as to by when they can get the troops back to how they were before the clashes happened in 2020?
What's going to happen is that when you have a bilateral of two, possibly the number 2 and number 3 leaders as a summit meeting which takes place, the eyes of the world, and more importantly, the domestic audience is very, very sharp, laser focused. And such a bilateral will not come out without any major outcomes, is imperative. So there are many low-hanging fruits which are there, and the stage was set by the last week's visit of Wang Shi to
All right,
took
sir,
place.
I'm really sorry I have to interrupt you, but I think we're getting the first picture. These are the live shots. The Prime Minister in the center of the table, on the opposite side, Xi Jinping of China. You can see the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister's right, the interpreters to his left. I don't know if we have the audio. If we have the audio, we should play up the audio, but I'm not. All right, we don't have the audio right now. The audio, I think, will come through subsequently. But you can see the Prime Minister there speaking to President Xi Jinping of China. You can see the warm handshake, the Prime Minister wearing a beige waistcoat and a kurta, and President Xi Jinping in his black suit and grey tie. Rahul Shivshankar, we are showing these pictures full frame. I can see the National Security Advisor. I can see the Foreign Secretary also sitting next to the Prime Minister. We don't have the audio on this feed, but these are the first pictures of the bilateral that is underway. Rahul.
Yes, it's been confirmed to me that a gentleman called Sheng Shanji, I just hope I'm pronouncing that name right, is also part of that conversation. He's the chairman of the National Development and Reform Commission and has been in office since March 2023, and as governor as well as deputy party secretary of Zhejiang and the party secretary of the Central Committee. So he's a very senior officer. And obviously somebody who's closely associated with the economic side of things in China and is supposed to be quite close to President Xi Jinping, who is the other person who is eliciting some amount of interest in that particular meeting. And those pictures are now being broadcast also on our screens here, so quite clearly that was a loop that was put out perhaps in advance. Maybe the Indian side said, hey, how did this go out before we could put out? So maybe there was some scheduling issue there, but we got a glimpse of that meeting, and I did tell you that President Xi was visible there looking across from the Prime Minister. But yes, this is quite clearly a meeting that is going to be focused on two definitive issues. How much progress is made, Zaka, of course, no one can say. Closely guarded meeting, the details of which, even who was going to be in the room, was not well known and publicized. So you have a plethora of officials. They're going to try and look at some of those issues. Trade definitely on the table. I think that's perhaps the low-hanging fruit. But trade by itself is not going to bridge that trust deficit. We've had trade relations with China. The trade even intensified after the incident in Galwan. So that never really is a deterrent as far as China is concerned when it really wants to press home the advantage as far as its own territorial interests are concerned, and they end up always in some ways or the other impinging on ours. So I think the conversation has to be centered at some level around rebuilding that confidence, and we'll have to address some of those outstanding boundary issues. Whether it will come to some resolution, whether we will see a momentous movement forward, remains to be seen, and that we'll only get to know once we see the readouts of the statements that are put out by both sides. And we'll also have to look at them very closely to see how much convergence there is in what really transpired and what the leaders have actually agreed upon, and the direction really also of the relationship. But it's quite clear now that this is a message to say that we're back in business, that these two principles in Asia are back in business. And I think Mr. Trump might actually be taking to Truth Social, as you were saying, and perhaps might, in a fit of fury, lash out. Who knows? He's an unpredictable element, so we don't quite know. But I'm sure he's up looking at these pictures with close intent, and I'm sure his advisors are not very happy. There's another interesting thing that one must sort of bring up here, that obviously this meeting was presaged by a statement by President Putin to Xinhua news agency here, where he talked about BRICS being the viable platform, but he didn't include any commitments from the Indian side. So he says China and Russia are very keen to ensure that BRICS becomes a viable platform. He didn't talk about India there, so clearly he knows the red lines. He knows that India doesn't want to be part of any communication that could suggest that it's anti-West. We've always said we're non-West, but we're not anti-West. So Putin, being the diplomat that he is, a person who's been involved in looking at geopolitics, as obviously somebody who was involved in the security apparatus of Russia, knows how to frame issues better, clearly, than President Trump, who would sort of see this as a complete sort of, from a completely blanket perspective, so there's no nuance there. But obviously from Moscow, the nuance has been added, which gives, of course, us some amount of cover to suggest that, look, we're doing what we are doing in our own interests. We're not aiming this at anyone, so no need for anyone to get panicky about the direction in which this thaw is proceeding. So we're awaiting word, of course. That meeting will now go on for another 10 minutes. If it did start exactly at the dot of 12, I got a message at 12:03 that the meeting had begun. So if you're really going to hold them to 40 minutes, then it's going to be 12:43, which means in about 8 minutes that meeting should end, and we'll see some of those leaders coming out. Of course, the press conference will only be sort of taking place much later in the evening, but the readouts will be available soon after, hopefully. Those are always preset, as you know, because delegation levels, they would have been communicating with each other so that they could work out any wrinkles in the language, and there would be convergence there in communication.
Right.
So given that, it's an interesting time. Yes, back to you.
So the first set of pictures have now come out. We don't have the audio on this, what the Prime Minister said, what Xi Jinping has said, but hopefully we will get the readout of what both sides said. General Pandey was making a point about, and I think Rahul is right, the two issues that will presage this meeting are, one, what's the next step in confidence building measures as far as the boundary is concerned, and two, of course, trade. There's a gentleman by name Zhang Shanjie, who's the head of the NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission of China, which essentially deals with the trade issues. He's also from Zhejiang, which is in the eastern side of China. It's one of the provinces that is heavily export-driven, export-oriented. So there'll be a lot of announcements around trade. But General Pandey, you were making that point about, what can be the next step as far as restoring confidence in the boundary arrangements are concerned, because that confidence was shattered 5 years ago with Galwan. We're now in the process of normalization, but that process seems to be taking its own time.
Yeah, so one thing is very clear, that the Chinese have also understood that you can't push India around. But more importantly, I think India has arrived on the world scene to be able to handle its security situation and economic rails, all together. And they don't even need to clash. If you see, the trade with China has continued to grow in spite of our conflict on the security situation on the LAC. And of course, there are multiple other actions the Chinese have taken in the last about couple of years, engaging Pakistan, giving us defense equipment, putting a spanner into our effort when we wanted the word of TRF to be brought in at various levels at the Security Council, and even in the recent meeting which happened. So there are a number of issues which are there which needs to resolve. But I guess when this two very, very important leaders of the world are meeting today, they would have preset certain outcomes which will flow out. And I think the most easiest one is possibly looking at certain degree of de-escalation at the LAC, which will be immediately evidenced by both sides. And I guess both sides are looking that we should not go back to the pre-Galwan days, or the event of Galwan, which actually derailed our reputation across the world for the Chinese and also for us in terms of being very, very,
peaceful,
not so peaceful and all. And therefore, we need to work at that.
I also want to focus on who all are attending the meeting, who all are part of the delegation. Akanksha is also there here in our studio. So on the Indian side, obviously the Prime Minister is the principal. You have the National Security Advisor, the Foreign Secretary, the Ambassador to China, obviously. The EAM is not traveling because of health reasons. Who do we know is attending on the Chinese side, and what may that indicate in terms of what we can expect later this evening as deliverables out of this meeting?
Right, Zaka, we do know that the Commerce Minister is part of that delegation from the Chinese side. You rightly mentioned that the NDRC chief of China, that is Zhang Shanjie, is part of the delegation as well. Important to highlight that NDRC is playing a very critical role over here. It's the topmost council when it comes to the economic policy making organization in China. So that's also going to decide, and there will be discussions surrounding the kind of investment China is looking to make in India. Remember, when Wang Yi made that visit just days ago in the month of August itself, it was decided that they will be removing export control checks as far as fertilizers are concerned, as far as tunnel boring machines are concerned, most importantly, rare earth materials. Now, rare earth materials are so significant for China because they use it often like a bargaining chip, something we've already seen when they were slapped with tariffs by the United States. The first thing they did was to come up with retaliatory tariffs and also stop the export of rare earth minerals. So if India is managing to get that export come in from China, that is in fact a win-win of sorts for us. India, of course, has also offered certain, say, uplifting of various checks which were sort of curtailing Chinese FDI. That happened soon after the Galwan clashes in the year 2020. Okay. And so India is looking towards attracting greater Chinese FDI. This year itself, in July, the Niti Aayog proposed 24% of Chinese FDI be welcomed in India, and that's a very key strategic figure, so that India is able to control the greater sort of portion of management when it comes to startups or even MSMEs, which will be welcoming that Chinese FDI. Most importantly, we are looking towards Chinese FDI coming to sectors like telecom, which is dwindling, as we all know, in the Indian economy, also looking towards sort of propping up enterprises. So Chinese FDI is going to be playing a very significant role, and perhaps you can expect
the Chief Economic Advisor made this mention as well. This was before the budget, that India needs to amp up Chinese FDI coming into the country. At that time, he was not viewed very favorably. But let me go back to Rahul Shivshankar, who's joining us from Tianjin live, as this meeting, I think, is now coming to its concluding part. Rahul, just on the economic side, and I think Akanksha made that point about rare earths, the Chinese have used rare earths very effectively in their ongoing trade negotiations against the United States. The Prime Minister spoke about the importance of rare earths just earlier this week when he was inaugurating that Suzuki factory in Ahmedabad. Has that now have rare earths become the new oil?
Oh yes, absolutely, Zaka.
हमारे स्पेशल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स के बीच बॉर्डर मैनेजमेंट के संबंध में सहमति बनी। कैलाश मानसरोवर यात्रा फिर से शुरू की। दोनों देशों के बीच डायरेक्ट फ्लाइट भी फिर से शुरू की जा रही है। हमारे सहयोग से दोनों देशों के 2.8 बिलियन लोगों के हित जुड़े हुए हैं। इससे पूरी मानवता के कल्याण का मार्ग भी प्रशस्त होगा। परस्पर विश्वास, सम्मान और संवेदनशीलता के आधार पर हम अपने संबंधों को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। एजेंसी चीन द्वारा SCO की सफल अध्यक्षता के लिए मैं आपको बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं। एक बार फिर चीन यात्रा के निमंत्रण के लिए और आज की हमारी बैठक के लिए आपका हार्दिक धन्यवाद।
Was the opening comments from the Prime Minister. He's mentioned 3-4 things which is part of the road to normalization between Delhi and Beijing. The border management mechanism that was agreed to in Kazan, the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra being resumed, direct flights will soon be resumed, direct between Beijing and Delhi, and possibly Mumbai and Shanghai as well. The Prime Minister talked about the combined 2.8 billion people of India and China, and how the relationship has to be founded on mutual trust and mutual respect. He concluded by saying he congratulates the Chinese presidentship of the SCO, the rotating presidentship of SCO. China is the host currently this year, and he's ended by thanking President Xi for the invitation to visit China as part of the SCO Summit. So Rahul, these were the opening comments that the Prime Minister made. Obviously, this was in front of the cameras, then the cameras go away, and for about 30 minutes they have the tete-a-tete, which I believe will be coming to a conclusion now.
Yes, we'll also be getting an update on what President Xi said in response to the Prime Minister's introductory remarks. So that will be very, very interesting to get the Chinese perspective on where they're coming from. But the Prime Minister putting those issues there, right there, threadbare, center front, and suggesting that, look, we've got to normalize our relations, and the only way we can do it is by rebuilding trust. And that really, as I told you, was the one commodity that is in deficit. You can promise all the amount of trade, you can bring in all the number of flights, you can bring in as much FDI as you want, or rare earths, but if you don't have trust between these two principal agents that are going to determine the shape of the world in the next 50 years, well, there's going to be a problem, isn't it, Zaka? And that, I think, is the Prime Minister is very right to focus on this. And the Indian point of view has always been that the Indian side has always lived by the old principles of peace and mutual respect between these two countries, founded way back in the 1950s. But it's the Chinese that have continuously violated our trust. They have been assertive on the borders. They have made territorial claims that are unjustified and unfounded, even historically, and therefore have plunged the relationship into crises just when, of course, things were looking up or could have the potential of looking up. And you have to wonder really at the President Xi and his approach, because he's also facing headwinds, not just globally, but domestically, economic headwinds. And let's not forget that the Chinese economy has slowed. I won't say it's spluttered to a stop or anything, but yes, it has slowed. There is a housing crisis here in China. When you go down the streets, and I don't want to sort of amplify my voice, I might just be picked up and taken away, but the fact of the matter is, Zaka, that you can see that there has been, there's a little roughness at the edges, so to speak, and things, if you speak to some of the locals, they will tell you that COVID did deal a cruel blow to the aspirations of China, and therefore the president has also approached this from a pragmatic point of view. And in his metaphors that he uses repeatedly in speeches, just the other day he said that we must climb the mountain and enter the forest even though there are tigers there. So he's urging the people of China to take risks, to take the situation, the opportunities that adversities present, and build a case for China's growth and recapture those heights. So he used that metaphor. It's been widely quoted here in the People's Daily. So there is reason for the Chinese president to be engaged and perhaps assuage, as I said, some of those doubts that still linger in Indian minds.
I want to play out again what the Prime Minister said. These are opening comments at the start of the bilateral meeting, which happened about 45 minutes ago. Let's play that out again, and then we'll go back to our guests and try and get them to weigh in on what the Prime Minister meant. These are the three precepts: mutual trust, mutual respect. Let's try and play that out once again for our viewers.
Excellency, हमारे गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत के लिए मैं आपका हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ। पिछले वर्ष कयान में हमारी बहुत ही सार्थक चर्चा हुई थी। हमारे संबंधों को एक सकारात्मक दिशा मिली। सीमा पर डिसएंगेजमेंट के बाद शांति और स्थिरता का माहौल बना हुआ है। हमारे स्पेशल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स के बीच बॉर्डर मैनेजमेंट के संबंध में सहमति बनी। कैलाश मानसरोवर यात्रा फिर से शुरू की। दोनों देशों के बीच डायरेक्ट फ्लाइट भी फिर से शुरू की जा रही है। हमारे सहयोग से दोनों देशों के 2.8 बिलियन लोगों के हित जुड़े हुए हैं। इससे पूरी मानवता के कल्याण का मार्ग भी प्रशस्त होगा। परस्पर विश्वास, सम्मान और संवेदनशीलता के आधार पर हम अपने संबंधों को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, चीन द्वारा SCO की सफल अध्यक्षता के लिए मैं आपको बहुत बहुत बधाई देता हूं। एक बार फिर चीन यात्रा के निमंत्रण के लिए और आज की हमारी बैठक के लिए आपका हार्दिक धन्यवाद।
With the opening comments by the Prime Minister ahead of that bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping. It's been going on for 45 minutes now. I want to go across to Siddhant. The points that the Prime Minister emphasized: the border management agreement between the two special representatives, the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra being resumed, direct flights to be resumed soon, and the three precepts of mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual tolerance. What do you make of the initial comments that the Prime Minister has made?
Side that the direct flight to China will be resumed. Perhaps that's going to be the biggest takeaway from this meeting so far, going by what Prime Minister said in the opening remarks. In fact, Prime Minister Zaka also spoke about the interest of 2.8 billion people of both the countries. They are linked, and he also said that this will also pave the way for the welfare of the entire humanity. Prime Minister also thanked China for opening up Kailash Mansarovar Yatra. So, Zaka, meeting started at a very, very positive note. In fact, Chinese side have been asking for the resumption of flight from a very long time. In fact, it finds mention in almost all the documents released by both the countries in last 6 months or so. But this is for the first time that Indian side has confirmed that there is going to be the resumption of flight, and that is coming from the Prime Minister Modi himself.
Okay, I also want to go across to Professor Swaran Singh, who's joining us from the Center for International Politics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Tara Karta is former director at the National Security Council Secretariat. I want to go across, yes, Professor Singh first. A lot of nice things are being said, and obviously, India and China are in the process of normalization of ties, but central to it is the boundary dispute. We had Wang Yi here last week, and they agreed to an early harvest. We don't know quite what the contours of an early harvest are, but ultimately, the first of those 3 steps, disengagement, has concluded, but we are far away from de-escalation or de-induction. We still have 50,000 troops on either side of the line of actual control. Do we know in terms of timelines or processes as to how soon we can get to a pre-2020 position? Because it's not normal for 2 neighbors, 2 large countries, to have this kind of a standoff continuing, even though they haven't fired at each other in the last 5 years since the Galwan clashes happened.
That's right. After their initial disengagement, de-escalation is apparently taking longer time. And therefore, the focus now is to create atmospherics on the line of actual control. And that is where the opening up of Kailash Mansarovar Yatra is now going to be followed by opening up border trade in 3 border points of Lepulek, Shipkila and Nathula. And that should perhaps make the environment little more stable to then think of de-induction, as you just mentioned. So when we talk of early harvest or low-lying fruits, it's some of these actions. And I think since Chinese want to focus on the overall relationship while India wants to focus on the border, India is reciprocating in that sense in allowing easy visas for Chinese nationals, first with technical staff, now also with managerial staff. And Prime Minister just announced flights, direct flights. We had 9 sectors till 2019, about 335 flights every month. It may not start with a big bang of that nature, but I think some of these direct flights are likely to be allowed in that sense, agreeing to what Chinese want to focus on overall meeting. Let me also underline the fact that this meeting is taking place before the Shanghai Cooperation Summit meeting takes place. And some of the understandings will also guide now the language that will flow into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization deliberations and the outcome final document, in which case India would underline the concerns about terrorism, indirectly talking about China's connections with Pakistan as well, because Shanghai Cooperation Organization fundamentally is focusing on energy security and extremism, separatism and terrorism. So I think this meeting preceding rest of the meetings would also kind of set the tone, and in that sense is a recognition from China how India is the second most important country in Shanghai Cooperation Organization after China. And he's meeting President Putin later during the day. Again, that also showcases that he's meeting Indian Prime Minister first, and the triangular meeting of Putin, Xi and Indian Prime Minister is on Monday, which again I think Rahul mentioned how India is trying to have balance in that sense, not appear kind of completely bandwagoning, because language between Moscow and Beijing often is very different.
Yeah.
They have no limits partnership in that sense. So India is ensuring that balance and setting the tone in the following deliberations that will come from here, ensuring that India's interests and India's concerns are highlighted in those deliberations and
But one of the points that you made, and I think it's a very valid thing to ask Tara Karta this, the whole reason for existence of the SCO came together, one of the pillars was to counter terrorism. And unfortunately for India, I can't think of a single SCO summit document which has called out Pakistan-sponsored terror directed at India. Even as recently as June, when the defense minister had gone there, a few weeks after Operation Sindoor, this became the standoff point that China refused to include Pak-sponsored terror or call out the names of organizations like the Lashkar and the TRF. Again, I don't see, that being explicitly mentioned at the summit document today or tomorrow, whenever the document gets adopted. Tarakarta.
No, you're absolutely right that the RATS, which is the SCO thing, has really done nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even as an intel sharing mechanism, it's been quite pathetic. But what I like I was saying on your show earlier, the things are moving really fast. You look at the visit of the Chinese foreign minister to Pakistan, Afghanistan, that trilateral which they had, the emphasis was that this whole region should sort of stabilize and against terrorism, that this should not be an issue in not just Afghanistan, Pakistan, but also India. He made that statement that China sees all three countries as necessary for stability. So that, to my mind, is China per se doesn't like the terrorist outfits in Pakistan, right? They have a fundamental dislike of this jihadi stuff which is going on inside Pakistan because they are scared of it going back.
So why then don't they call it out? Why then don't they put it on documents that, of summits that they are hosting?
Yeah, I suppose it's the fact that Pakistan will do things for China which India will never do. They will give them every single access which we want. So it will be a very quiet kind of a pressure. But I want to just emphasize one thing. The SCO, for years I was wondering what SCO was about. What is it binds all these people together? Right now, if you look at SCO's members, all of them who are trading with China, our major trading partners, Vietnam, Kazakhstan, are all hit by tariffs. If US perhaps has backed off on tariffs with China, but recently, just to give you an example, Kazakhstan has been named one of the worst offenders. China is Kazakhstan's largest trading partner. The same NDRC has been recently in Kazakhstan trying to negotiate a better deal where Kazakhs' exports to China increase, trying to redress that huge trade imbalance. So this, to my mind, is something which will be of focus in this meeting to get India's exports also to China increase.
Well, we hope that that's the case, ma'am. But I haven't heard anybody from either the Indian side or the Chinese side talk about that so far. But I want to go across to Rahul Shivshankar. I believe the meeting is still going on. Rahul, is going to be close to an hour. It was supposed to be 40 minutes. So clearly there's a lot that both principals are discussing and are currently still holed up in that engagement. What are you hearing?
So a source communicating to me that the reason that two important people are in that meeting is because there is determination on both sides that something substantive must come out. Otherwise, the powers that be around the globe will just say this was a photo op. So the presence of the Commerce Minister, I've been told in one line, important presence of Commerce Minister, and I've tweeted that too, and the NDRC Chairman, very, very crucial and critical. It's very cryptic remark, very cryptic response to me to a specific question that I asked, why is it important? They've just emphasized that it is important, but it is quite clear that they are trying to work out some sort of takeaway from this that goes beyond the optics. And I think that, we've been speculating on what those issues could be. They probably won't be on some of the core concerns that India has with regards to boundary disputes specifically, or even, China's China's attempts to prevent India from going out there and sanctioning certain terror organizations in Pakistan. But certainly it might be on trade issues. There might be timelines that are fixed on declarations with regard to normalizing those trade relations. So I think fundamentally we're looking at some takeaways from this that will make the headlines tomorrow and will give substance really to this particular meeting. But
is anyone there talking about, Tarakarta was suggesting a moment ago that China, for example, in the case of Kazakhstan, and they've had a huge problem with the US, I think Trump himself called out Kazakhstan saying it's a big tariff king, so on and so forth. So China is trying to increase its own trade with Kazakhstan, get Kazakhstan to start exporting more to China. We have a massive trade deficit issue with China as well. Is the presence of the Commerce Minister, the NDRC chair, in the direction of wanting to increase Indian exports into China, or is it about increasing Chinese investments into India?
Well, one would hope so. And I was talking to some entrepreneurs here, and I kept asking them, why is it that our products are not competitive enough in China? And remember, there is, of course, now a gap between what minimum wages are in India and China. So it's not as if Chinese production is giving them a huge advantage. What it does do is, because of the scale of their production, it allows them to also, of course, bring down those costs, those input costs. And then, of course, the Chinese do manipulate their currency to be a currency that is not exactly paralleling its own real worth. So they do undercut the market. That's been a complaint all through. They get those advantages, but remember, the Indian side, the Indian business, private business needs to get competitive and enter those markets. I hope that there is some movement in that direction to try and rationalize that big deficit that we have on the trade front.
Important that the Commerce Minister of China and the NDRC Chairman of China are also part of that delegation. They're in the room in that meeting between Prime Minister and Chinese President Xi Jinping. I want to go across to Palki Sharma, Managing Editor of First Post, who's also tracking this meeting in Tianjin. Palki, you've seen the pictures of the Prime Minister and Xi Jinping, the opening comments of the Prime Minister. What do you make of what's been going on so far, and what are really the expectations from this meeting? It's the first time that Prime Minister has landed on Chinese soil in 7 years.
Yes, the first time since Wuhan, and a lot of water has flown down the Brahmaputra in all these years. We've had a rocky relationship, and we've seen a reset in the making. We saw the thaw in Kazan. So the second meeting really between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping in the last 10 months. They met in Kazan on the sidelines of the BRICS summit last year. This one is very, very significant. Zaka, also, it's important to appreciate the background, the backdrop in which this meeting is coming, not only for India but also for China. The Chinese economy is not growing at the pace at which the Chinese leadership would like it to grow. The president's hold on power is being questioned by most accounts, and that is something that Xi Jinping has to deal with at home. And of course, there's Donald Trump, who is ripping apart the global trade order. In this context, for the Indian top leader to come and meet Xi Jinping is as important for China as for India. We've seen the local papers for the past few days filled with the details of what China expects from the SCO Summit, and there's a statement from Wang Yi, interestingly, saying that Beijing aims to help the SCO enter a new stage of high-quality development characterized by greater solidarity and productivity to make, and they're talking a lot about the global south, which is interesting. So there are expectations, but I think India's engagement with China in the past few years, in the past decades, in fact, has shown us that the optimism needs to be cautious. And while the Prime Minister himself in his opening comments spoke about direct flights and mutual trust and respect and a border management mechanism, there are obvious challenges. But at this point, I believe both are looking at the opportunities more than the challenges.
So the meeting has just concluded. So it was supposed to be 40 minutes. It's gone on for 1 hour. So exactly an hour. It's just concluded. Palki, you were referring to, the backdrop in which this meeting is happening. Obviously, a lot of the conversation will be on the bilateral issues, and there's a lot to talk about, the boundary dispute, the trade imbalance, so on and so forth. But really, Trump is the elephant in the room. How do you think both sides are going to navigate that?
I think both sides are working on building resilience and working on building alternatives, and India and China are major trading partners. The challenge for India, Zaka, is, as many experts have pointed out, that while on the global stage China talks about multipolarity, in Asia it wants unipolarity, and that is something that India will have to counter in its own way. Like I said, at this point they're exploring convergences, but I'm sure Donald Trump and his team would be watching the images coming out of Tianjin this weekend to see the leaders of India, China and Russia. And of course, this is a bigger gathering, more than 20 leaders coming together here. There are 10 member countries, 2 observer states, 14 dialogue partners, and if you see the front page of the China Daily, yesterday Xi Jinping held a meeting with 10 different leaders, if I could show it to your viewers, including KP Sharma Oli of Nepal, the leaders of Myanmar, Kazakhstan, Egypt. So this is a coming together of leaders from the global south, and while India is the worst hit in terms of the Trump trade war, there are many other countries that are grappling with the shock that has come with these tariffs, and I'm sure they're all looking to build alternatives. And in that context, if you look at the larger picture, there is a message for America clearly that the world is looking at alternatives and India and China are coming together to do that. So that should give Washington some food for thought.
All right, Palki, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Palki Sharma, Managing Editor, First Post, reporting for us from Tianjin, where the SCO Summit is happening. And this meeting, the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, is just concluded. Rahul is there for us. Rahul, so it was supposed to be 40 minutes. It went on for an hour. Clearly, lots to talk about between the two principals. What are you hearing in terms of what are the sort of broad spectrum areas that they touched upon?
Well, we're trying to press our sources to come out with something, give us something here to talk about, but we haven't heard back from them. I'm monitoring constantly my WhatsApp to get updates, but initially when we were given a bit of a briefing yesterday, we were told that 2 or 3 issues would be discussed. Outcomes weren't, of course, talked about, but 3 issues were definitely on the table. One, of course, was the trade issue. One was the resolution of border troubles between the two countries, and very, very importantly, the issue of the cooperation, military cooperation between China and Pakistan. And I just want to highlight something. Here is the China Daily in my hand, Zach, and you can see the headline, the Shanghai 5 at 25, how the solution of border issues led to the creation of a new type of transnational organization. So China moved very quickly to resolve its border troubles with some of these 5 countries, including Russia, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan and Kazakhstan, but has let the issue with India hang fire now for decades altogether. So that tells you that, look, the Chinese are perceive a threat from India's rise. They don't want to vacate the space here in Asia for a country like India, which has been a civilizational power. India at its height in the 16th, 15th and 16th century, 17th century, 30% of the global economy was driven by India, so that potential remains, of course, and India has struck gold literally in Q1, 7.8%. No one saw that coming on the back of manufacturing, which was an area of concern, as you know. Even in the budget, the finance minister had talked about it. On the other hand, if you look across the border in China, the economy is the one that is spluttering, and there are concerns right now in China about their own contribution to economic stability globally, because if there is a drawdown
That was again on the sidelines of the BRICS summit last year, in October of last year. But that's only the first part. You still have 50,000 troops sort of staring at each other on either side of the line of actual control. And I think that is something that both leaders will be keen. The next step, which is de-escalation, bring back the troops, bring them back to their barracks, as was the case pre-2020, pre-Galwan, pre the clashes that happened in the summer of 2020. So I think that step is going to be the big overriding bilateral issue to tackle.
None of these
and like
countries
I said,
can
there
pay
is
the
a big multilateral
cost
sort of elephant in the room, which is the Trump tariffs.
to the Indian products the way Americans do. Okay, let's be honest about it. So they may say that we'll open our markets. Maybe Russia has offered to open the market. Chinese ambassador said the other day we are open for Indian products into China. But the fact is, Zaka, that none of these countries can pay the price what Americans pay to the Indian exporters. So,
right.
you know, that's something very important to highlight. Yes, we are looking for more investments from China, and also, Zaka, the export curb. So remove, you know, the flow of rare earth, fertilizers, and tunnel boring machines. So there are many other products also in the list. Perhaps that is something that is somewhere India wants assurance from China.
I also want to get Akanksha quickly in on this. You know, the Chinese apps that were banned in the aftermath of Galwan, the Chinese phone companies that were not welcome anymore, some of the electronic manufacturing firms, etc. And finally, of course, Chinese investment, FDI, into some of these high-end manufacturing sectors. Are you hearing anything might change, or might you know, there might be a giveaway in this meeting, at the end of this meeting?
I think for big starters, we'll of course look at the ending of all the curtailment that had taken place after Galwan. And I said that as I said earlier as well, we are still in the process of removing those checks. Remember, India is quite notorious for having those checks when it comes to foreign direct investment. And that's a complaint that has also come from the Chinese side, that if we are looking towards attracting greater Chinese investment, then that also means removal of those checks, which we are still in the process of. In fact, that was a request what MEA sources have also shared with me. That was a request that was flagged off by the Chinese foreign minister as well. But important to highlight, Zaka, that the trade deficit goes hand in hand with the trust deficit, something that we had seen back in 1998 as well, when the Pokhran 2 test had happened. Both the sides, in fact, India and China, had reaffirmed that there's been no trust between the two countries, and that was also one prime reason why the nuclear testing happened. But having said that, we may also see some more developments happen after the bilateral meet with Russia, because let's not forget that there's also talk about the RIC. Many are saying that currently, in the current scheme of things, we have different priorities, and that bringing that troika back, which in fact dates back to the post-Cold War era, is currently still very difficult. But I still have my hopes on the troika, because the last meeting, which was a very significant one between President Xi and Prime Minister Modi, happened in Kazan in Russia, and the Russian president has played a very significant role. I still have my hopes that we may perhaps see some forward movement.
We have some details of what the Chinese president said to Prime Minister Modi. I want to get Rahul in on this. It's a great pleasure to meet you again, Mr. Prime Minister. Welcome you to China for the SCO Summit. Last year we had a successful meeting in Kazan. The world is going towards transformation. China and India are two of the most civilizational countries. We are the world's two most populous countries and part of the global south. It's vital to be friends, a good neighbor, and the dragon and the elephant to come together. Is there space, though, in the room in Tianjin for the dragon and the elephant to tango, Rahul?
Good neighbor. Well, I don't know. Is he trying to talk himself into being a good neighbor? But some breaking news coming in, Zaka. I've just got word from my sources that cooperation with a long-term vision in all fields has been the initial foray in this conversation that lasted 1 hour. So, in all fields are the operative three words: cooperation with a long-term vision. What does this mean? Now, of course, we can go around the table and break this down, but cooperation would entail, of course, the fact that there would be an element of progress in trying to overcome the deficits that we have seen on the border. There would be economic cooperation, which would be more egalitarian between the two countries in the trade sector, and obviously also perhaps cooperation for regional security, which is the real elephant in the room, if you were to really ask me, between the dragon and the elephant. So I think this gives you a sense that a comprehensive conversation took place between the Prime Minister and President Xi Jinping, and this conversation is looking at a long-term view of the relationship. Whether it results now in quick outcomes is a question that we will have to debate and watch out for once we get the printouts, the readouts of what the two sides put down on paper, specifically with respect to the exact specifics of the conversations. But fundamentally, I think this is, it could be said now, gradually, that we are moving towards a cautious reset of that important, very consequential relationship in Asia. And this is not going to sort of be parsed over lightly in Washington, D.C. These words, if they result in monumental sort of moves forward in the next few months, maybe even the next 1 year, we can really look at a new sunrise in the East over these two countries. And it could lead to a reinvention of geopolitics as we know it globally too, because the coming together under the rubric of various organizations which have been built up by these countries and which they are part of to enhance cooperation would be important. I am not getting word from people that I've been speaking to here in the Chinese media about any bilaterals as yet with the Pakistani Prime Minister, which is something that we need to also be looking out for, because that conversation will also impinge on what Xi Jinping means by talking about being good neighbors. Because if you want to be a good neighbor, you've got to cut those threads, those sort of threads which are insidious really as far as India is concerned with Pakistan, or if not at least cut them, then at least moderate them to the point where they don't become like kite string that slashes at our security, throat of our security really. So I think fundamentally this has been a wide-ranging conversation. It's exceeded time, which tells you that this